Good morning, everyone. This is Louise Bedard, and I'm the Program Manager for MOQC. I want to welcome you to our first virtual biannual meeting. I'm going to hand the meeting over in a few minutes to Jennifer, but I'm going to just go through a few housekeeping items because this is our first virtual meeting, and I would like us all on the same page so that we can have a very fun and efficient meeting for the next 3 hours as we spend our time together. So I just want to make sure if somebody can give me a thumbs up that everybody can hear me, that would be great. But our theme today is, does quality improve in a compassionate culture? Okay, before we begin on the details of our meeting, I want to share with you a screenshot from Zoom. I know many of you are still being admitted to the meeting, but in order for us to have an efficient meeting, you notice that when you were admitted to the meeting, you were all on mute. And you'll see in the bottom left hand or possibly the top of your screen, you will see that you are on mute still as you've entered the meeting. We're going to keep everybody on mute during the meeting so that our keynote speaker and other speakers can move through their slides, so that you also can have the capability of asking questions and sharing comments. We're going to manage all of that through the chat function. So the chat function will be in the task bar that will either be at the top or the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can see that that is shown on the picture here. Now you can chat to everybody that is in the meeting, or you can select an individual and chat to the individual privately. I will be managing the chat on behalf of the MOQC team, and I will be sending the questions to the speaker, so that will either be Michelle McQuaid, who will be our keynote, or to Jennifer as she presents the state of the consortium. And so your individual question may not be specifically asked, but I will be grouping like questions, and we will do our best to represent all questions during the time allotted. If we seem to be running out of time, then we will definitely get your questions answered after the meeting and send the questions out to all individuals who are attending the meeting. Just so that everybody knows, as we always do, all disclosures are presented. Both Jennifer and Dr. McQuaid have no disclosures for the meeting today. And for continuing education credits, which we all love that you would take advantage of, we have made available to you for this meeting both CMEs and CEUs for this meeting. And just so that you can be prepared to collect those credits at the end of this meeting, or when you have time post this meeting, please take a minute to review the objectives for this meeting right now. After you do that, we want to just inform you that we will be connecting with people out in the audience and the greater world during this meeting. We do have a Twitter handle, and it is @MOQC team. And if you are familiar with Twitter and would like to do so during the meeting, you are welcome to use our Twitter handle @moqc.team. And just as a reminder, our email is moqc@moqc.org, and you can use that at any time. I will speak up because I hear that that is the feedback people have. I'm going to pause at this time because I understand that there's no audio. Okay, I think we're back online, at least with the audio. Isn't it sad that people can't hear me? Okay, just a few more things and then I will turn it over to Jennifer. So, of everybody to hear, it's best to not listen to me, but best to listen to Jennifer. For this meeting, we request, and it was in our pre-meeting information, that you do sign in with both video and audio. Audio, of course, so you can listen to the information that's presented, but video, most importantly, for our keynote presentation. We will be having some short breakout rooms, and from an equity perspective, it's always much more fun to be able to see the person that you'll be in a breakout room with. I don't want anybody to panic that we all know that the hair salons and the barbershops just opened, so nobody will be critical about how anybody looks, but it is just much more fun that you can see your buddy that you'll be in a breakout room with. Assignments are randomly placed. We'll be placing people into your breakout rooms. So please do not ask me through the chat that you want to be placed with a particular person, because I have no capability of doing that for people. There will be an email that will go out to everybody who is on the meeting today and who registered for the meeting with this deck. This deck has all the information for the CME credits, both to register from your My CME account and also how to complete your evaluation for the meeting and to obtain your CME credits. As you know, it is really important that we receive feedback from you for this meeting. First of all, it's our first virtual meeting, and we would like feedback because we're learning, just like you are, about how to live in this virtual environment. But secondly, we always want to improve and try to meet your needs and add value to your very important days. And again, we can only do that by getting feedback from you. All right, the last piece is if you're having any issues with technology, please use the chat function if you are having that. Of course, that's difficult now because I'm speaking and I'm the person who's managing the chat, but we do have a backup person and Sam is doing that. So between the two of us, we should be able to manage that. If you aren't getting a response, you can text me at my cell phone, which is 734-358-3434, and I will use that as a backup to the chat if you are having technical problems, such as your video or your audio. All right, so remember, nothing is earth-shattering. We want you to enjoy this meeting, learn a few things that you can take back from a quality perspective for your patients and your practices, and have fun. So I am now turning this over to Jennifer. So I'll talk to you at the end of the meeting. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to join Louise in welcoming you all. This is a strange time for all of us, and we're just delighted that you're here. Although we're not in person to share coffee and cookies together, we are able to have more people join us today because of the virtual platform. This is today's agenda. I'd like to welcome the people that you see here. Just briefly, I'd like to welcome our sponsor members from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, Mark, Jackie, Ellen, and Ferris. I'd also like to welcome members from the other collaborative quality initiatives from MSQC, MROC, and MEDIC. I think the fact that we have the virtual platform allows people from the other collaborative quality initiatives to join us today, which is really exciting. Our POQC members, our Patient Oncology Quality Consortium, patient and family members, are really important, and as you know, have veto power for everything we do, including our keynote speakers and our measures. So today we have Diane Drago, Mike Harrison, Amanda Iliong, and Llewellyn Zhang, who spoke at our Faith and Culture panel at our January biannual meeting. And then, of course, we'd like to thank Debbie Webster from the Cancer Division at the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. These are the folks who work with us on our ovarian cancer initiative and also on our tobacco cessation quit line, which offers free behavioral counseling and tobacco replacement products to patients who use tobacco. And last, the NIH just awarded us, we got our notice of grant award yesterday, to expand genetic counseling and other risk assessment for patients who are likely to have an inherited susceptibility to breast cancer. And I'll be talking about that briefly in a little bit. All right, so I'm very pleased. As you know, before we introduce our keynote, we always have somebody from our Patient and Caregiver Quality Council introduce our speaker. This is a photograph of Amanda Crowell-Itliong. I'm very pleased to introduce Amanda today. So Amanda has been living with ovarian cancer for 11 years. She's a passionate patient advocate who's actually spoken all over the country through writing and speaking and service with organizations such as Survivors Teaching Students and the American College of Radiology. Amanda was a pioneer in the inaugural Millennial Trains Project with her work, Sick and, which researched the shared identity of chronic illness. She's been a storyteller for The Moth, a speaker advocate for Healthcare Voter and Priorities USA, and is working on a new grant-funded project called EASE, Education, Alliance, Solace, and Empowerment, with her GYN oncologist and nurse practitioner. Amanda earned her BA in Human Services at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and her master's degree in Administration, Planning, and Social Policy from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She also has a postgraduate certificate in Dialogue, Deliberation, and Public Engagement from Fielding Graduate University. Amanda, thank you for being with us today to introduce the topic of compassion in the workplace.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm so glad to be asked and just excited to be with you this morning. I hope we can all agree that we want to live in a world with more compassion. Sometimes it can feel like we're surrounded by suffering in our personal lives, in our jobs, and in the world around us. I know that this is a group of people who take pride in being able to alleviate suffering. The best oncologists not only work to cure disease, but to help give patients better quality of life. We wish for happiness and well-being for those who are suffering. Social scientists have demonstrated that helping is contagious. Acts of kindness beget more kindness in a chain reaction of goodness. The more we care for happiness of others, the greater our own sense of well-being. One famous study indicated that infants' pupil diameters decrease both when they help and when they see someone else helping. This suggests that they're not simply helping because helping feels rewarding. It appears to be the alleviation of suffering that brings reward themselves, whether or not they engage in the helping behavior. Seeing compassion demonstrated is beautiful to witness as a patient. I tend to be a really complicated patient. If I weren't so darn likable, I would be really a pain in the ass. I'm on my third recurrence in 12 years, which means that I've had so many different types of surgery and treatment, as you can imagine. Each month, we meet to manage my current disease, along with long-term side effects and exciting new side effects. It really does take the entire team in the office to get me through an appointment. I'm most impressed that my doctor always demonstrates compassion, care, and thoughtfulness by including each person on her staff as an essential part of my care team. It's clear that they are all important and that they all take care of me together. Between my gyn-onc, my MP, the residents, med students, nurses, and medical assistants, the team always divides the workload and makes sure that all the meds get refilled, new prescriptions are sent in, extra research about my case is done, recs are created for testing and for other specialists, and that my next appointment is scheduled and I feel heard and well taken care of. I specifically notice this compassion because it's often lacking at other physicians' offices. While I might discover a member of the healthcare team who shows compassion to me, there's sometimes very little connection between the doctor and staff members who communicate with the patient. As a patient, one of the worst things is dealing with people who you can tell really dislike their work environments. The disconnect often leads to confusion for me, and sometimes parts of my care don't receive follow-up. My GynOncs office showing compassion to all the healthcare team members and demonstrating the value of each team member is one of the main reasons I'll always keep coming back. Each one of them means the world to me. I used to teach leadership, and there are many positive truths about compassionate leadership. A compassionate leader has a genuine interest in seeing their people not just perform and increase profits, but thrive. Getting to work with a leader like this makes you look forward to getting up in the morning and going to work. It makes you want to work harder. If you also have the benefit of working in a helping profession, there's so much to be positive about. Research has proven time and again that positive teams are way more productive. So here's another example of what compassion looks like to me in the oncology setting. I know I already told you what a pain in the ass I am. Well, I'm also one of those patients who has a twisted port. It's a problem that causes heartache everywhere I go. Fortunately, most chemo nurses are amazing and talented caregivers, as you know. They pride themselves on making really yucky moments for patients as easy and painless as possible. When I come in for my infusions or just a port flush and a blood draw, I'm usually on one particular nurse's calendar because of my crooked port. She's been helping me monthly for about 5 years, and she has it down to a science. I require a longer needle and some extra time pushing to find just the right spot. It's when my special nurse isn't available that I become a real problem child. If it's somebody helping me who's never tried to access my port before, they usually step up with quiet confidence, and I tell them it's a tough one because it's twisted, and then remind them to get the longer needle. They go for it, and unfortunately, it's always a dud. No return. It just won't work. They move the needle around in there for a while, trying to get the blood return, and then start to tell me how they never miss a port. At this point, they're either going to have to start over and try again or ask someone else for help. They're frustrated, and I can always tell that my port has given another blow to a wonderful nurse's confidence. I try to tell them that it's always a tough one, and everybody has missed my port before at one point, but I can feel that they're frustrated about it. That all takes a turn when they open the curtain to get some help, and all the other compassionate chemo nurses discover that she needs help. Next comes the loving chorus of, "Oh, it's Amanda. Her port is always a challenge for all of us. Everybody has missed her port at least twice." Everybody in there has a story about how difficult it is. It's all smiles and kind encouragement, and pretty soon it's clear that this shouldn't be a knock to anyone's ego. I'm just complicated. The port's twisted. It's not something we can have. Whoever comes in to help show the nurses the best trick to try to get it, and we move along. It's such a supportive environment, and I never have to feel bad about the challenge of my bionic body because everything is taken in a loving and lighthearted way. Instead of causing somebody's bad day, I get to witness the compassion in the chemo nurses environment. Many of you probably have a compassion-related story connected to your origins in medicine. My career working with the brightest and most compassionate university students required writing mountains of medical school recommendation letters. My challenge to students was always to keep the reason they were so passionate about someday being a physician or a researcher in their minds throughout the grueling road to becoming one. I hope today that you not only remember the original reason you came to this career, but also that you can still feel it. If not, perhaps bringing more compassion into your life for your patients, coworkers, loved ones, and for yourself can help you get back to the reason that you're here. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. That was very moving. I think you yourself are incredibly compassionate, the way you're able to see other people's actions towards one another. We really can't thank you enough for making yourself vulnerable today, and you introduced the topic so beautifully. We're next going to move to, our keynote speaker. I just have to move it down. I'm sorry, everybody. This is the fun of Zoom. Great, so that's my thank you. All right, next I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Michelle McQuaid. I have been participating in Dr. McQuaid's online sessions and was delighted when she was able to join us today. Dr. McQuaid is a best-selling author, workplace well-being teacher, and playful change activator with more than a decade of senior leadership experience in large organizations around the world, and I mean around the world. She's passionate about translating cutting-edge research from positive psychology and neuroscience into practical strategies for health, happiness, and success. An honorary fellow at Melbourne's University Graduate School of Education, she blogs for Psychology Today, hosts the top-rated weekly podcast Making Positive Psychology Work, and her work has been featured in Forbes, the Harvard Business Review, the Wall Street Journal, Boss Magazine, The Age, and more. Dr. McQuaid holds a master's in applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania and is currently completing, actually I do think she completed her PhD in appreciative inquiry. Michelle lives to help people discover their strengths, move beyond their fears, and discover what it takes to flourish with confidence. I want to let you know that we decided to address compassion in the workplace well before the world started pulsating with the pain that we're living through right now, because compassion is associated with safety, patient safety. So if we practice in settings where compassion towards each other is strong, we have seen patient compassion thrive and also patient safety improve, both of which are obviously very important. And then COVID hit, and then all of the grief over the murder of our Black citizens. And this seems incredibly timely right now. So I'm just delighted to introduce Dr. McQuaid, who I've gotten to know by joining 800 other people on her sessions. So Michelle, thank you so much for being here, and we're really in for a treat. I hope you'll enjoy Michelle's visit with us today.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm just going to check thumbs up if you can hear me okay with the sound. Awesome, that's a great start. So I'm just going to bring up some slides here to guide us through this conversation together this morning. It is such a privilege and a pleasure to be here with you. The work you do in the world is so important. And if there's anything this morning that I can help you learn from sharing some of the latest research and the evidence-based practices that we're finding around compassion to do what you do even a little bit better in the world, then that will have been a morning very well spent of my life and hopefully of yours as well. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen with the slides now in front of you? You should be able to see something that says Everyday Compassion. And let me just check. Awesome. We've got some technology working, which is the way that we like it. I find using Zoom as a platform is a great chance to practice both self-compassion and compassion for others as we all navigate this new technology together. So fingers crossed where the technology won't give us too many opportunities to have to reach for compassion during this session. But if we need to, we'll think of it as an opportunity to practice these skills. So I want to share some of the latest research, as I mentioned, in terms of what are we finding neurologically, psychologically, socially around the practice of compassion. But as you guys will appreciate, the very best research on human behavior only tells us what works for some of the people some of the time. So as we dive into today's session, I want to start with a little health warning, which is that we're going to use the research to accelerate our understanding and inspire our practices. But of course, then the invitation is for you to take away what you learned from today's session and pull it apart in your own world and figure out what works best for each of you. So to help you, we have put together a little playbook that has detailed all the science that I'll be sharing today and citing that for you. So you'll be able to pull through that for further follow-up and things like that from the session. But again, my hope really is that I can share some new findings, some new insights, help confirm perhaps some of the practices you're already doing, maybe offer some new ones, but most importantly, inspire you to go away and experiment in your own lives, in your own teams, with your own patients on how you can provide even better care. So to help us, I want to just do a little check-in about how you're doing at the moment, given everything that is happening in the world. So Vanessa, if we can pop up the poll, that would be fantastic for us if we're able to do that. So there's a poll on your screen now. If you're able to answer those questions, that would be fantastic. So thinking about over the last 2 weeks, how easy has it been for you to switch off from work? So again, just through that scale, 0, not at all, 10, super easy. How have you found it in terms of being able to switch off from the work that you've been doing? So again, just click there on the poll. Louise is just explaining, if you look at your taskbar, you can see a little poll icon there. It has some little vertical bars. And if you click on that, I can see we're getting some answers coming in here. So 0, not at all. The work I did felt so important, I found it hard to switch off. If that's not true at all for you, you'll be down at 1, sorry, 1, 2, 3. If you found it pretty hard actually to switch off from work because it's felt so meaningful, so important in terms of the difference that you're making, then you'll be up towards the 8, 9, 10s, or if you're somewhere in the middle, that's okay as well. So we'll just give you a moment here, quickly clicking on that poll. I can see we've got about 10 of 100 of you, so we're about 10% there. So keep clicking on, let us know your answers so that we can see where are you when it comes to the work I did felt so important. I found it hard to switch off. Again, 1, not at all. 10, yeah, that's really true for me. Yeah, and again, no problems, no shame in wherever you are. If you're unable to submit, that's absolutely fine. Let's try to get as many voices in. If you're unable to submit, but you feel okay putting it into the chat what your number is, please by all means feel free to contribute there. The poll is absolutely confidential, and again, understand that, to me, and we'll explore this with the session today, there just is no shame in this, right? Wherever you are is where you are, right? That is part of the essence of compassion, is being able to honestly accept where we're at right in this moment and hold space for ourselves and others without judgment. Being involved in that. So this might be our first exercise in compassion today, as you just own where it is for you. So I can see we've got about 34% of you voting there. If we can add a few more moments, just if you haven't voted yet, see if you can find that little poll piece on your chat window and add a vote there. And if it's not, that's okay. Again, we're getting a bit of a feel here. If you want to put in chat your number, then thank you so much, Padma. That is completely great as well for us. Okay, so again, I can see those numbers starting to climb up as people find the buttons, and we can see sort of sitting there across those overall numbers that, as we might expect, given that so many of you go into the work that you do because of the sense of positive difference you want to make for your patients, we're sitting up a little more towards the high end here than the low end, although we've got a few there sitting in the middle around the 4 and 5 mark as well. So again, for me, this question is less about where you are as a group, although it's interesting. It's most particularly about where are you personally. The other question, for those of you that were able to find it on the poll, it was the second one, which was, I was judgmental and critical of myself. This starts to give us some insights into self-compassion. And so again, we're going to talk about this today. How self-compassionate are we? It's hard to give what we don't have for ourselves. And again, we were using that same scale. 1, not at all. I really wasn't too judgment and critical of myself, up through to 10 of, yeah, this one can be challenging. And again, we sort of see a fair amount of us sitting around that 7 to 8. And we're going to explore neurologically why reaching for self-compassion is actually really hard for most of us, because our brain isn't wired often for that to be our first response. So again, thank you for inputting there, and I can see a few of you popping there into the chat as well. And then the third poll question that many of you have already answered, but again, feel free to add into the chat if you want your number and response. I felt safe at work to bring up problems and be honest about mistakes. And so again, 1, not very, leading through to the 8s, 9s and 10s of, yeah, I really felt able to do that. And again, it's nice to see here is that we've got quite a bit around that 7 and 8 mark coming in for us. And again, thank you. I can see a few of you popping into chat as well, your responses on these questions. And while it's interesting to also see for a group where you are, as much as anything, just take a moment personally to kind of see, where am I on these things? We're going to dive into each of these questions a bit more and explore what are some of those evidence-based practices that might help us balance this out. I truly am a believer that there's no right answer, number 1, to these questions. There's just what's right for you right now. And so I want you to come away today being intelligent about reaching reaching for compassion. Like anything in our lives, we can have too much of a good thing. And what is right for you isn't necessarily right for the person sitting next to you virtually in the Zoom screen, or for the patient that you might be caring for later today as well. So part of what we want to understand is what's right for, where are we each now, what's right for each of us, and where perhaps it needs some adjusting. If where you are right now isn't feeling like it's necessarily serving you as best as you would like, or your teammates or your patients as you would like, then what are the things that we can do to adjust around that? So again, please keep popping those answers into the poll if you're able to. I'm going to help us start to dive into here and put a little bit more meat on the bone here as to how can we build compassion for ourselves, for our teammates, for our patients, so that we have more to give. I think it really helps to start with a bit of understanding about, well, what is compassion? It's one of these words, number one, that intuitively we all get the essence of, but when we start to look into the research, there's actually been quite a lot of clarification over the last decade, particularly as our ability neurologically to measure some of these different responses like empathy, like compassion. As we've understood that a bit more, our technical terms here, our definitions of what's going on, have started to gain a bit more clarity, appreciating, of course, that these things are always unfolding just as good science should. So I find often empathy and compassion gets a little bit confused between each other. And at the moment, the general scientific acceptance of empathy in the latest research is that it is our understanding of what somebody else is experiencing. It's being able to put ourselves in their shoes, to empathize with their experience of the world, with their feeling of the world, to just feel that, to be in that emotion with them. Now, compassion, on the other hand, the current definitions are leaning towards, yes, you can absolutely do that. You can feel that sense of what they're feeling. You can put yourself in their shoes. But compassion is also now carrying in the definition the commitment to then act and to try and help support that person around that feeling. Now, I want to be super clear. I think sometimes the most powerful act of compassion is just being willing to sit in that feeling with that person without needing to turn on all the lights, is the way I think about it, because I'm a natural doer. And so the sitting and the surrendering isn't always the easiest thing for me to do. I think we've seen beautiful examples of that over the last few weeks in the conversation of race, in so many different mediums, and where so many beautiful voices have asked us just to listen and to sit with the pain that is being experienced before we rush too quickly into action. Now, I think this is an important distinction, because sometimes sitting doesn't feel like we're doing much of anything, right? Between the empathy of just the feeling, again, I think sometimes we can feel these emotions with somebody else and we want to kind of like move on to other things, right? Like it can be hard to sit in those uncomfortable emotions that we often share when we're in pain with each other. Compassion, though, is not just seeing and understanding the feeling. Even when we're sitting, that in itself is an act, as we've seen so beautifully over the last few weeks, that can be profound. To be able to just sit alongside somebody and help hold a space for their pain. Sometimes compassion is much more active than that. There's a way we can offer support, or we can provide resources, or we can connect them with other people that can help, or we can just keep coming back and checking in on how things are doing. But it's important to understand this difference. Neurologically, and particularly, what we're understanding is that empathy and compassion show up in two different ways in the brain. Empathy uses neural pathways that are associated with pain and can lead to burnout for us, because there's not necessarily anywhere for that pain to go. And so this is really important. Often we talk about compassion fatigue. I think neurologically what we're coming to understand is perhaps our terms around these things have gotten a little bit muddled up just because we didn't know what we didn't know about the brain until recently. So empathy tends to light up the pain circuits in our brain, and that absolutely over time can lead to burnout if we don't have a way to be able to express and sit, surrender, and then when we're ready to step forward with that pain. Compassion, on the other hand, neurologically lights up the love circuits of our brains. It looks the exact same way as when we're feeling connected and expressing love and care towards another person. Researchers often talk now about compassion as the Rolls Royce of kindness, and I think that's a really lovely way to be able to think about it. Now, what happens is when the love circuits of our brains start to light up, it actually nourishes our brains, it primes us for action, and it often sparks that dopamine reward chemical for us and oxytocin as well. And so we're much less likely, honestly, to be getting burnout through compassion fatigue than we are through empathy fatigue. But I do think there's another twist that we're learning neurologically that might help us understand this, what's been called compassion fatigue dilemma. And so many of you touched on it beautifully in your first answer. And I actually think it's not compassion fatigue, it's passion fatigue. It's the burnout from the sense of meaning and purpose that we often get from our work. And so here I want to share with you some of the research of a wonderful professor called Robert Vallerand. Robert Vallerand has been studying our sense of passion, meaning and purpose, not just from our work, it could be from other things in our life, a sporting interest, a hobby or the like, and the impact that it has on us. And when I look at this research and having a huge passion around my work that I do in the world and often struggling to be able to switch that off, it makes so much sense to help me understand why it might be burning me out and what are then the tools I can reach for to balance it. So Professor Adam Grant at Wharton Business School explains that our sense of passion, our purpose, our meaning in our work is simply the belief that what we do has a positive difference on others. And studies have found that in any job, we can absolutely find this sense of meaning and purpose, that what we do has a positive difference on others. And some of the very first studies in this, and some of my favorites, were actually done with janitors in hospital and care environments, where they absolutely found about a third of janitors had this passion, this sense of calling around their work about helping people to recover and be well in hospital environments by keeping the environment as clean as they possibly could. And this is very typical. Almost any role that somebody's in, at least a third of us, sometimes more depending on the work, feel this sense of passion and purpose in what we're doing. And this is a great thing. There are so many benefits, both professionally and personally, to having a sense of passion in our work. But as with all things, we can have too much of a good thing. One of the downsides is it can make it hard for us to switch off. And this can make us vulnerable to compassion fatigue, as it's traditionally been called. But I'm going to nudge you today to think about it more as passion fatigue instead. And so to help us understand like where you might be with this, you answered that question about, is it hard to switch off? Another way Robert suggests we can think about this is, if you were a pie right now, how big a slice of that pie does work take up for you? So think of yourself as a big, beautiful circular pie. How big a slice right now is your work taking up for you? And just take a moment. Sometimes it helps you to close our eyes or just look down in front of us. Sometimes I like here to put my hand on my heart or my hand on my gut, just let me get into my body and kind of check in about what's my truth in this moment around this question. But if I'm really just honest with myself, I don't have to share it anywhere else. And I think about that balance between work and all the other things happening in my life. How big a slice is the work part for me right now? And when I think about that, how is that positively impacting my well-being? How is that slice of work adding to my well-being, nourishing my sense of compassion, that love that I might be experiencing neurologically as I come to work each day? And how might it be negatively impacting my well-being? And again, I want us to be able to sit in the truth that most things have an upside and a downside, right? We often prefer to see more of one than the other, perhaps depending on our lens to the world, but most things have both. And I want you to just take a moment and sit in the messiness of when we think about how big a slice of our life is worth taking up for us right now. What's the positive impact on that? And what's the negative impact on that? And how's that impacting the people around us? Because that's what really gives us that piece of compassion to reach for, right? We can't give what we don't have. And so if work isn't nourishing us as well as it could be right now, perhaps it's draining more than it's giving for us, even though it feels so meaningful and worthwhile to do, then that tends to not just impact us, it tends to impact other people as well. And so again, I just want you to check in before I share the science and the practices. Just if nothing else today, you make some space to get a little more self-aware and honest for yourself. I promise that that is the first step to being compassionate more about anything. Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to dive on in. What do we do with this? And then I'm going to give you some space in breakout rooms to talk about this in some small groups a bit more with each other as well. So you can steal with pride in terms of how you might go forward on this. Now, Robert explains that at times when that slice of pie is a bit big, and when we're saying we're at the 7, 8s, 9s, 10s about being able to switch off from, finding it hard to switch off from work, that we're leaning towards what he describes as obsessive passion. I think we all have moments of this, right? And moments of it are not the problem. The challenge Robert's research has found is that when it starts to become months, perhaps even in some cases years, that obsessive passion is the way we approach our work, it has some challenges for us that it is worth being mindful of. And so what starts to happen is that doing our work gives us such a sense of purpose and meaning in our world that becomes really hard to switch off. It fuels our sense of identity about who we are in the world and what we're proud of showing up to do in the world. And so we often find ourselves answering the emails, you know, outside our work hours, you know, unable to take it off our phones, for example. Perhaps our friendship circles start to become even more infused with people from that world because these people get lit up by this as well. So it feels more meaningful spending time with people in this space than it does spending time with people away from this space. When we're doing this kind of work, it energizes us. It gets all those dopamine and happy reward chemicals firing in our brain. And a little like a drug addict, right? It becomes painful almost to step away from it because everything feels a little dimmer, not quite so bright, not quite so meaningful, not quite so energizing when we're stepping away from the thing that's giving us so much purpose in our life. And again, a bit of obsessive passion, not a problem. Too much of it, Robert and others' research absolutely show, does lead us to burnout. And so it's not ideal long term. The alternative Robert suggests is what we perhaps want to lean a little more consistently towards is harmonious passion. And harmonious passion still allows us to have this sense of meaning and purpose, that feeling of calling and positive difference in the work that we're doing. But instead of having so much of that language of, I have to, I must do, we have more of the language of, I want to, I can't wait to. And when we need to switch off, for our family, for our friends, for ourselves, for other passions that we might have in our world, we're able to, without feeling like there's that itch we've got to scratch until we get back to the obsessive passion part. Now, this is not rocket science, as you're going to find most of the things are around the science on these practices, but it doesn't mean that it's easy to do. And so Robert's research has found there are a couple of ways that we can try to balance our passion and stay more harmonious. One, and you're probably going to find this the hardest one, is that we need to schedule real breaks when we're in our work, to the extent we can. I know in some roles this is easier than others, but one of the things I find teaching wellbeing in most workplaces is if I could just get people to stop for 10 minutes and actually eat their lunch, not at their desk, but somewhere ideally outside where they could get some fresh air, it would probably improve wellbeing in workplaces more than any other expensive program that we could put in. And so just have a think for yourself. Do you schedule real breaks through your day wherever you can? Because we're not machines. We're not made to just switch on and go at a steady pace. Like every living system, we pulse, right? We ebb and flow in waves throughout our day. And so we need recovery breaks to be able to keep sustaining the best of our energy as we go about our work. But when we're in obsessive passion, stopping one, like, feels like we'd be letting other people down, but honestly, it's the drug craving of the dopamine, the reward sense we get from our work, that makes it feel like stepping away would be turning off that happy drug. And so we don't want to do it, even though we know we probably should. So scheduling real breaks is number one. And I know that's probably not going to be delightful news to many of us. Secondly, is just tuning into some of our thought patterns that we have around our work. So if you are stuck in stories of, I have to, I must do, you know, I can't not check my phone regularly, even when I'm not at work, because there could be a very important message coming through that I need to pick up. Now, again, for some of us in your roles, that may absolutely be true. So I want you to be intelligent about this and you find the way you use these tools to work for you. But for many of us, that's not the case. And yet, again, our sense of obsessive passion can make it feel like we have to, we must do. So when we find these words coming into our language around our work, Robert's research suggests we try to switch up these thought patterns and think about more about, what do I want to do when it comes to my work? What am I really looking forward to doing? What might have the biggest impact today with the time that I've got available for my work, or the energy that I'm bringing to my work today? But the moment we're in have to and must do, it's a sign that that obsessive passion perhaps is pulling us in a direction that's not necessarily good for us or the people we're caring for long term. And then the third and perhaps most surprising finding in Robert's research is that we need more than one passion in our lives. It can't just be our work. And so Robert's research has found, even with people who teach yoga, which you would think of all the things to be obsessive about must be good for your well-being, but actually, if that's their sole passion, even they burn out over time. And so we need more than one passion. And when I interviewed Robert for the podcast, and we'll share that conversation with you if you want to hear more of his work directly from him, he was like, you know what, you have to have more than one passion. And so we bought a piano. I learnt piano as a kid in our house, and I put it right near the stairs by the kitchen. So you have to walk past it a couple of times a day. And for me, I know my passion's veering towards obsessive now by the number of days since my fingers have last been on that keyboard, even just for 5 minutes. Because if I can't find 5 minutes in my days to make time for other passions, then I know perhaps I'm getting out of kilt again. So if work is a big part of your pie and there's not a lot of room for other passions, then take this as a seed being planted to say, if you really want to bring all you have for your work to be the most compassionate person that you can be for others as well as for yourself, they need you to have other passions. One of the challenges of obsessive passion is because it ties so intensely to our sense of identity and our worth in the world, it starts to make us less flexible over time to change. And of course, if nothing else, the last few months have shown us how flexible and agile we need to be able to roll with the changes that keep unfolding in front of us. And so we don't want to become too fixed and rigid because our identity requires our passion and our work to look a certain way in order for us to feel worthy, right? That's actually not being of service to anybody, including ourselves. And so we want to invest in multiple passions so that, one, we can stay well to do the work we do, two, we can stay more open-minded and have more to give to others when we do show up, but three, so that we can stay a little more flexible and not get so rigid that our sense of self-worth depends on our passion being able to look a certain way. And so these, for me, as somebody that definitely spent a lot of time towards obsessive passion, were important ahas to begin playing with how I made space to be of better service in the world in the work that I did for others. So let's make some space for you to have a think about what this looks like. And I've mentioned short bursts are okay. So again, like if you've got a project, you've got, something that's requiring for a bit, it's okay, but it needs an end date. Yep. So again, even, sometimes we'll find in our team a few months, we're working on a book or a big piece of research or something like that. Maybe even 3 months of obsessive passion's all right, but we try to hold each other to an end date about when are we getting this back in balance? We put it in our diaries to go, okay, we need to hit the reset button now. We can't just keep going this way. So again, short bursts, Robert reassured me was okay. Long bursts, not so much. So let's give you some space to think about how this lands in your world. And again, we want you to be intelligent about it. I know different roles that you're in will make it easier to switch off than some other roles will. And that's okay. Full permission to own where you're at. But please also don't make it an excuse to not take care of yourself. I know that you're so motivated to make a positive difference for others in the world. In order to make that positive difference, you have to be well. And obsessive passion actually isn't the way to be of service for others, because again, we can't give what we don't have. And the research on this is very clear. It will bring you to burnout over time. And so you don't want that, and nobody around you needs that either. So we're going to pop you back into, some small groups, Vanessa, if we can get ready in a moment to open the rooms. And again, I want you to just think about, how does your passion for work right now tend to sit on that continuum between harmonious passion or obsessive passion? And what impact is it having for you and for your team? And knowing that there's no shame in it, right? There's the answer that's right for you right now. And then there's the space of where you might want to get to over the coming weeks or months. And it may be the same or it may be different. So the extent that you're comfortable in your group to just share generally, oh, I lean a little this way right now, and perhaps here's some of the impact I can see. Generally, does your team lean a little more towards obsessive or harmonious? Because teams will tend to infect each other with this. And so again, at a team level, what might you be able to do to help support each other? So as you go into these chats, you'll have about 4 people in a room, technology all going well in a moment. When you get in there, we're asking you to share first for you. Where do you lean towards? Is there some adjustments you might want to make? If you've got harmonious passion nailed, share what you do to make it work, because it'll probably help other people in your room. And then secondly, as a team, do you lean a little more obsessive or harmonious? And what works, or what could you try to help your team keep this in balance? So Vanessa, if we can try to open those rooms, hopefully a message will start to appear on your screens. We're going to give you 10 minutes in your rooms. We'll let you know there's a warning sort of halfway through. Try to make sure every voice gets heard. There's a click there, click it, head on in. We'll see you in 10 minutes time. So again, guys, as you're coming back in, please pop into the chat, either what you already do to balance your passion for work, or how you intend to get better at balancing your passion for work after today's session. So please type into the chat box. That way we can pull from the chat for you your own little obsessive passion toolkit that works in your world. So if you can start typing into the chat box for me, how do you already balance your passion for work? If you're great at taking breaks or using words or language that helps you keep it in perspective, or making sure you've got other passions or there's other things you do. Or if you're not there yet, if you're still a little on the obsessive side, what might you try after today? There was one small thing, one small change you might start to make after today to bring that passion a little more into balance. please type it into the chat box for me right now. That would be fantastic. So again, on your Zoom menu, you'll be able to see a little icon that says chat if you haven't found that already, and pop it there. That would be fantastic. So I can see one starting to pop up. Taking a 20-minute walk outside each day at work is fantastic. And I will say, look, even 2 minutes of caring for your well-being a day is better than no minutes. So 20 minutes is fantastic. But if you're like, oh my goodness, I just don't know how I'd fit that in, 2 minutes. Small and consistent thing to do. Jennifer practicing a new art. Again, I think it's awesome. Kelly reading. I live with my Kindle app on my phone is a good break one for me. Taking the first minutes to breathe and do daily prayers in the day. Again, I think it's a wonderful one. And I love that you can get 30 minutes, but if others are reading these or listening to me going, where would I find the time? 2 minutes, yeah, even 30 seconds, some of the research on wellbeing habit shows is better than no seconds at all. So I know it feels like 30 seconds, what's that going to do of anything? But what it does is actually start the ritual. And once we start the ritual, it's much easier to grow the ritual. The other real key tip here is when you're trying to build these new rituals to balance your passion, make sure you celebrate after you've done it, even if it's only 30 seconds. So the celebration will give you another dopamine reward charge in your brain, the research suggests. And so that means the next time that you go to do it, you're more likely to want to do it so you can get to the reward again. And the reward can be super simple. It can be just like, woohoo. I'm often running victory laps around my office or the kitchen counter downstairs. It could just be a quiet like, yes, I did that. But just know somatically, it's really important that you feel the reward for having taken this break or gone and engaged in your other passion. Because right now, if obsessive passion is a challenge for you, part of the reason it's a challenge is that neurologically your brain is addicted to the sense of meaning you're getting from your work, and stepping away from that is like removing an addict's craving. And so we want to rewire that sense of reward to other behaviors that you can do, whatever works for you. There's so many beautiful examples popping up in the chat. And again, we'll grab these out of the chat so that we can share them with you as your own little toolbox. I keep popping them in there. It's fantastic watching them all pop up. I love the watching Jeopardy after work. But what we want is to make sure we reward ourselves every time we make a choice to balance these passions out, so our brain has a new way to get addicted to being in balance, that this is our sense of worth and identity and who we are, rather than just the job that we do. And so just make sure you do like celebrate, and somatically you want to feel it, so you get that charge of dopamine in whatever way feels appropriate for you to celebrate. But again, generally I suggest without alcohol or chocolate if you can, you know. So more about the feeling than the doing of something for the celebration. I'm not saying no chocolate ever, Jennifer, just, you know, it can be a slippery slope if we're always celebrating with the chocolate every time we take a break. And so one of the beautiful questions that Sam had asked in the chat earlier was, well, what if I'm good at doing it, but my team members struggle to take breaks regularly? You know, like we can't kind of chase them out for breaks, can we? And here, I guess there's some conversations I would really encourage you to have in your teams after today about, where do we as a group feel like we sit towards obsessive or harmonious passion? Is it serving us well? And how might we support each other a bit more about this? I think having those conversations then helps you collectively figure out what you want to do and how you can buddy up and support each other. Social support in making any of these changes really, really helpful. So I was saying, you know, before, for me personally, I use lots of like alarms on my phone and then put it out of reach so I can't just hit snooze. I have to get up and go and get it, so that I get up and take breaks regularly through the day. Two of my team members take a walking break at 3:30 each day. They're virtually on different sides of the city, but they go out and they walk for 10 minutes and they have a little social chat and catch up on their phones as they do it. Yeah. So again, think about in your team what's going to work to be able to support each other, knowing that this is the compassionate thing to do. Yep. We are not machines. You don't run at consistent energy all day. You ebb and flow. And in order to take care of your energy and show up and be of the best service as you can, you need to be taking breaks. We need to have balance outside of work so that when we are present, we have the best of ourselves to give and be of service to others. So this is the first one, because certainly in helping professions like yours, we find that there's this misnomer of compassion fatigue, which I hope after today are not words that you'll ever use as a group if you have used them in the past, but instead you might talk about passion fatigue if the sense and meaning and purpose is overwhelming, or perhaps understand sometimes it's empathy fatigue. We've got stuck in the feeling of the feeling, but we're not quite sure how to move into action. And remembering that sometimes that action of compassion is just that willingness to sit in the dark with each other without turning on all the lights, is the way I like to think about it. It's different from just the feeling and the turning away with that feeling. And we've seen that so beautifully modeled, I think, in so many forums over the last few weeks all over the world. So I want to move into the second step, because one of the other things you guys identified in your poll is that 57% of us at times felt like we were quite judgmental and hard with ourselves. And I've mentioned it's hard to give something we don't have. And so if we're not treating ourselves with compassion, if we're not being kind to ourselves, it's very difficult to continually extend that to others and not run out of that energy to give. And this I actually think is often harder than being compassionate with other people, not least because our brain is wired to attack any source of threat, including ourselves. And often we've learnt from an early age to use that inner critic, that voice of judgment, to try and give us that metaphorical boot up the butt when things aren't quite working, to get back in there and try and persist and keep going. But what we've seen from hundreds of different goal-setting studies in all sorts of domains, education, health, relationships, work, is that when we constantly rely on that inner critic, as we're making mistakes, we're bumping up against our limitations, we're falling short on our ideals, as every single one of us do, because nature wired us to be perfectly imperfect so that we could learn and grow and evolve. When we keep reaching for that inner critic voice to try and motivate us or push us towards our goals, over time it becomes exhausting. And what these studies show across hundreds of different goal-setting environments with all sorts of different people is we become less and less likely to achieve our goals. And it's often where we start, the older we get, to get that feeling of just being exhausted, trying to keep up with the lives that we're trying to live, even though they can feel so centered in meaning and purpose and trying to make that positive difference for ourselves and others in our world. So the first step for being self-compassionate, Associate Professor Kristen Neff would suggest in her research, but others as well, is actually just recognizing that making mistakes, bumping up against our limitations, falling short, failing, is actually what it means to be human. If we were meant to have this all figured out, nature would have wired us to be able to do that already. But we're not. Nature wired us for evolution so that we could keep adapting as circumstances around us change, as the world around us changes. It's why nature has given us the gifts of curiosity and creativity and our ability to connect with each other so that we would have the capacity to keep learning and growing. So the first piece here when it comes to reaching for self-compassion is just knowing that you are good enough. There's nothing wrong with you because you're getting it wrong. There's nothing wrong with you because you're making mistakes. There's nothing wrong with you because that you are failing. There is no shame in that. Congratulations, you're human just like the rest of us. Now, how do we learn to navigate that with more self-compassion? So let's try a little exercise here and see how you go. In a moment, I'll say go, and I want you in the chat to see if you can count backwards from 996 in increments of 7. And so just each time, each number, just pop it in the chat, okay? So are we ready? Are we steady? No, you cannot use a calculator, Ellie. Go. Go. 996 less 7 is what? Then less 7 again. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Keep going as much as you can, even though it might be hard. If you need to pop it out there, keep going if you can. Keep counting. Back. How low can we get? I'm going to keep you going for about a minute here. Louise is saying poop. Keep going. I can see we've got 961s and 962s popping up. Keep going. We're back to 954. Keep going, keep going, keep going. 947. Can we get any lower? That's Canadian for another word. Thanks, Louise. Keep going. 940. Can we get 937? Keep going. 933. Can we get any lower? Go, go, go. Let's see if we can get back even towards the 900s. Go. 926. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Can we get back? 918, Joan. 919, Roma. Oh, I don't know which one of those is right. Keep going. Holy cow, says Jennifer. Keep going. 906, says Carol. Who can get us below 900? Where is our winner? Can we get below 900? Keep going. 893, says Joan. 899, says Dawn. Okay, you can stop counting. 889, says Janet. Wherever you are, I just want you to take a moment and think about how you were feeling during that exercise. Yep, we could see some beautiful messages coming up from Louisa's poop to Jennifer's wows. But I want you to just think, when you're stretched perhaps out of your comfort zone, as counting backwards from 996 in increments of 7 is for most of us, when it's unexpected and we haven't had a chance to study and we're not allowed to use calculators, what tends to happen for many of us is the stories start popping up in our head around perhaps our own limitations and how we feel when we're pushed towards those limitations. Now, for some of you, you might have felt quite comfortable there of like, oh my goodness, I can't do it, it's okay. And others of you may have felt a little anxious around there about, well, what are people going to think if they can't see my numbers popping into the chat, or if I'm getting the numbers wrong? And what will that mean for my relationships, for how my standing is? Or I'd rather just sit this out because I'd rather not even try and be found out perhaps that I'm less than what people might have thought I was, than make myself vulnerable in this way today. And for some of you, it might have just been, I can't find where the chat window is to even start this exercise. I hate technology, okay? Whenever we're pushed out of our comfort zone, it tends to bring up those stories that we've often had from very early in our lives about how we feel when it comes to failure or the potential of failure, when it comes to how we feel about the risk of making mistakes that others might see, when it comes to how we feel about our own capabilities and our level of comfort with being vulnerable around the fact that we are each perfectly imperfect and we're all still figuring it out. And so these are the moments quite often where being able to reach for self-compassion instead of self-criticism becomes so powerful for us. And the research absolutely backs it up. While reaching for that inner critic often feels, again, that way to motivate ourselves forward, to be gritty, to be resilient, to go harder at something, the research shows over time it actually makes us, again, more vulnerable to burnout and less open to learning, and therefore less likely to learn and continue to improve our performance. But self-compassion, on the other hand, which people often say to me, but it feels soft, you know, self-compassion doesn't feel like it's going to be robust enough for what I need to reach for. What the studies show over the last decade is that reaching for self-compassion actually helps to improve our confidence, to remember that we're all human, we're all learning, it's a messy and magical process, and that's okay. To help maintain our motivation, to go, well, I may not have perfected it yet, but if I keep getting in here and trying, I will keep figuring more and more of this out. I may never get to be the best in the world at what I'm going to do, but can I be better than today? Absolutely. That is what my brain is wired to do. And it supports both our well-being and performance. Instead of filling us with anxiety, leaking our energy, we're actually building our brain's capacity as it's meant to in terms of that neural wiring and our capacity to keep learning and growing throughout our lives so that we can get better and better at what we do. And so again, I'm going to point you towards Kristen's research. We've got some of that captured in the playbook for you. I'll leave you her website in a moment in the chat. Louise will pop up for us. But Kristen's Kristen's research on this is really stunning. It's not just her, it's many academics now all over the world looking at how self-compassion helps to break those entrenched patterns of self-criticism while still being honest about our fears. And Kristen says, think about self-compassion as that wise and kind voice that perhaps a parent provided for you, or a teacher, or a coach, or a great mentor, a wonderful boss. And they're not letting you off the hook, right? That wise and kind isn't going soft on you. They're not going, oh, that's okay, don't worry about that, we'll come and clean that up for you. They're holding you accountable, and they're also encouraging you back in to see how you step forward rather than punishing you with judgment. Yeah. So self-compassion is that wise and kind voice. Often we're great at giving it to other people, but not so good at using it for ourselves. Kristen and I did a podcast together, and we'll share that with you if you want to hear more from her directly. But she said, think about it as your inner coach. It's that wise, kind inner coach that's going to hold you accountable, but also encourage you forward because they understand the potential that you have within you. And so one of the easiest ways that we've found to help people reach for self-compassion is, number one, understanding that we're all perfectly imperfect. We're all learning all of the time. And when we think about everything we've ever learned in our life, understanding that it travels this very simple learning loop. And so the learning loop goes that we act, we try something out, then we assess. We're always assessing. Our brain has that inner critic going all of the time. The challenge is often when we assess, our natural negativity bias means we tend to look for the worst about how we acted and then try to, beat ourselves up about that. When we assess, Professor Carol Dweck from Stanford University suggests that we ask 3 questions, and these are in your playbook. She suggests that the first question we ask here is, what went well, to assess the strengths of what we did. Because even in our worst moments, something will have worked, even if it was just we showed up and we tried. And we want to understand those strengths so we feel confident about what we have to build on as we think about what our next step will be. So what went well is the first question we want to ask whenever we're assessing for ourselves or for others. The second question Carol suggests we ask is then, and where did we struggle? Because even in our best moments, there's always some struggle. That's okay. That's what it is to be human and learning. And we don't want to miss those learning opportunities. Yeah. What went well? Where did we struggle? And then the third question is, and what did we learn? Because while we're very outcome focused generally, most of our outcomes are relatively short-lived. I'm sure there were things you were working so hard on a month ago that you would struggle to even remember quite what they were that were filling your days right now. And so what we take forward isn't often the outcome, it's the learning we got from getting to the outcome that allows us to tackle the next thing and stretch forward to the next challenge. And so Carol suggests when we assess, we ask, what went well? Where did we struggle? What did we learn? So that then we can adjust. And as we adjust, this is where we really want to reach for self-compassion, right? We don't want that voice of self-criticism beating us up. We want that wise and kind friend, that inner coach going, okay, well, based on all of that, what do you want to do now? And then we act again, we assess again, we adjust again in this continuous circle until we reach mastery, or until we get to a place where we're good enough that that's fine and we want to put energy into other things we want to learn. The last tip I will give you on the self-compassion research that helps me a lot when I'm adjusting is just to know also somatically, you can simply by placing one hand over the opposite wrist, and give this a try with me right now, you want skin on skin. Yep, so one hand over the opposite wrist, and then just breathing, take a nice slow deep breath in here, and a nice slow deep breath out, and another nice slow deep breath in, and a nice slow deep breath out. You want about 7 seconds of just some oxygen back into the body. The studies suggest somatically that this seems for many of us to bring a bit of oxytocin back into our bloodstream, which can help to lower some of those cortisol stress hormones for us and help us find that wise and inner coach a bit more readily. And I love this because I can do it under the desk, you know, when I'm in a meeting. If I was standing in front of you in a room full of you, I sometimes will do it behind my back while I'm standing up and teaching, if I'm getting something wrong or I'm worried about something that's not quite going right, so I can give myself some self-compassion as I'm presenting. You can do it sitting opposite somebody on your lap. So this can be a really beautiful way to just, in those moments where you feel that inner critic voice perhaps firing up, making it hard to show up and be the compassionate person you want to be, to literally reach for some self-compassion, and just know that this can be a way to bring a little bit of calm, a little more centeredness, a little more of that kind and wise coach back into our minds as we navigate situations we're facing. I love this quote from Carol Dweck, that when we already know we're deficient, we have nothing to lose by trying. And I think this is a wonderful piece on self-compassion to remind ourselves that we are all perfectly imperfect. The only option we have is to show up each day and keep learning, that learning is a messy and a magical process, and we're all in it together. So how do we make space for ourselves, number one? But in doing that, we also make space for each other to keep learning and growing as well. And so I'm going to, for time, skip this. I was going to get you to try and count backwards again, but maybe you want to later today just think about, well, what's something you've been doing at work that's been stretching you outside your comfort zone, that's been getting some of those stories coming up in your head around your limitations. Maybe travel that learning loop. Think about something you've been trying. What have you been doing? What's been working well? Where are you struggling? What are you learning from that process? And then, how might you adjust as you go forward? So again, those questions are in the digital playbook on page number 7 for you. And what I would suggest is maybe even during the break, when we go to break shortly, that you might even just take a few minutes there and go, okay, where is it? I often call it my end of the day victory lap. I have an alarm on my phone for when I tend to pack up at the end of the day, and I'll take my victory lap, which is just taking a few minutes to go, what went well today? Where did I struggle? What did I learn? How will I do that tomorrow? And that's my kind. Then I have a celebration, a little woohoo. And then I go, okay, today is done. Start all over again tomorrow, see where it takes me. I love this quote from Kristen around being mindful and softening to the suffering that we're experiencing without over-identifying with our mistakes. Again, I think a big part of compassion, as I mentioned earlier, is our ability to sit in the dark without needing to turn on all the lights. And so rather than beating ourselves up, calling ourselves names that we would never call anyone else, be so embarrassed if somebody realized what we were saying in our own heads, just remember, you're learning, you're human, you will make mistakes and bump up against your limitations, and that's okay. What matters most is what you do next with those things. And those learning loop questions and the reaching physically for self-compassion can be a really beautiful way to not get bogged down, burned out, or fearful of what we can continue to reach towards for the difference we want to make in the world. Okay, I want to come into our last skill, which is then, okay, if we've got compassion for self and we're not burning ourselves out with passion fatigue, then we're actually in a healthy and whole state to really be able to extend compassion for each other. And in your poll, this was actually, you rated quite highly on feeling like, you know what, within my team, I feel like I can be honest and talk about mistakes. And if that's truly true, that's fantastic. But just think about, might you be doing a bit of editing on those things if you don't feel okay with those mistakes in and of yourself? It's hard without self-compassion to truly be honest and vulnerable with other people about what's going on in our teams. And over the last decade, we've seen this growing body of research about the importance of psychological safety as we work together. This is the research of Professor Amy Edmondson at Harvard University. Again, she has a wonderful TED Talk, and Louise might have the link to pop into the chat window on that for you in a moment, but we'll send you a podcast that I've done with Amy on this work. And in all sorts of settings, we're seeing in the research that the highest performing teams, this is as true in health settings as anywhere else, one of the key things that differentiates them is that they have this sense of psychological safety with each other. And psychological safety is simply our ability to be honest with each other, to suggest new ideas, to own our mistakes, to not feel that we're going to be shamed or blamed or judged when we show up in all of our human messiness. And one of the easiest, but I think hardest ways, simplest perhaps, but hardest ways to build psychological safety really starts with the lens through which we look at each other. And again, remember, our brain is wired to attack any source of threat. And so one of the things that often happens as we're interacting with each other is a little bit like an overprotective parent. Our brain is constantly assessing everybody in front of us of, am I safe with you or am I at risk? It happens right back in that kind of oldest part of our brain, the reptile part of our brain, that is constantly judging, am I safe or am I under threat? Am I safe or am I under threat? And as a result of that, often we've gotten into patterns of thinking around different types of people that we feel safe with or under threat. And Professor Brené Brown suggests in her research that one of the ways we extend compassion and we build psychological safety is actually to consider that perhaps people are doing the best they can with what they have right now. Now, she points out, and I agree, that sometimes this can be a big leap of faith because it's easy to build an evidence list of all the ways we see perhaps people are not doing the best they can with what they think, with what we think they have right now in this moment. But just take a moment and think for me, and you can raise your hand if you really think other people turned up, if you really think for yourself that you turned up to work today to this call to try and be as difficult, disappointing and disruptive as you could. If that was your intent when you got on the call today, just raise a hand on your camera so we can see where you're at. And I can see some chuckling but no hands, right? So none of us get out of bed with the intention of trying to be as difficult, disappointing and disruptive as we can, right? We come to work each day hoping that we could do good work with good people that would make a difference and go home at the end of the day feeling like that was a day well lived. But maybe just have a think about, and you don't have to raise your hand on this one, but maybe just think about, maybe even for this week, do you feel like maybe someone in your team has turned up to work trying to be as difficult, disappointing and disruptive as they could? And often, even though we know that our own intention is pure, we tend to project onto other people, again, not because we're bad people, but because our brain's trying to keep us safe. And so we're a bit more trigger cautious. We had that heightened sense of awareness that the moment we think somebody else is perhaps trying to be difficult, disappointing, disruptive for us, that our brain moves to that source of threat, and then believing that people are doing the best they can right now with what they have, man, it gets hard, right? We've all been there, right? It's a superhuman thing to do. I want to explain how we manage it and why it might not be the best process to always keep ourselves safe. So again, Amy explains psychological safety allows for moderate risk taking. We're not talking about taking stupid risks. It helps us be more creative. It allows us to speak our mind. It helps us to put out some weird ideas, to ask the question we might feel is the dumb question without the fear of having it cut off. And so how do we do this? And again, this chart is in your playbooks for you. The brain naturally leans towards judgment because of that reptile part of our brain that wants to keep us safe. And when we're in judgment, we tend to come from more of a fear place, and we engage in some very human behaviors that you will have been part of as well. So I just want to emphasize again, no shame to any of these, but as I go through them, maybe just think, do you have some go-to behaviors here that happen when perhaps other people are sparking off your fear radar in terms of the way they're showing up at work with you? Most common one is we tend to leap to conclusions. We see somebody do something or say something, or we pick up a vibe from them, and instead of asking them kind of, oh, what's going on there, we assume. Yeah, we assume, oh, that person doesn't like me, or oh, that person's always difficult around that, or that person never feels their weight, never pulls their weight. And we do it again, not because we're bad people, but our brain's trying to process lots of information and keep us safe. Studies have found that our ability to mind read each other's emotions and intentions generally is no more reliable than flipping a coin and randomly assigning an outcome to it. even when we've been trained in emotional intelligence, right? So just know we tend to be far too confident about our ability to mind read each other than we really should be. And that's often what creates these leaping to conclusions, and it builds what the researchers describe as interpersonal mush in our relationships. And I love that as a technical term, interpersonal mush, because these conclusions, this tendency to mind read, it bogs our relationships down unnecessarily. One of the other things we tend to do is get stuck on the hump of politeness. We bite our tongue or we fix it for them. And we do this thinking we're being kind. We tell ourselves it's a kind thing to do. I'm just not going to say anything because I don't want to upset them. Or I'll just sort that out because I don't think they really know how to do it. But in those moments, we actually rob people of a chance to learn and grow. Yeah, we rob them of their chance for their own learning loop and our opportunity to support them. There is nothing compassionate about biting your tongue or fixing it for somebody rather than helping them understand what needs to be done. It is actually disrespectful and it's a mean thing to do. And I want to reframe this in your mind because this is one of the ways we often fail at compassion with each other. We bitch and moan about them, right? We have the conversation in the corridor or just, oh, you won't believe what Jennifer did today. And we create this sense of common enemy intimacy. So we soothe ourselves, we make ourselves feel safe because this other person agrees. But of course, again, it's not kind, it's not compassionate. If something's not working with someone, we owe them that conversation. That is the kind and compassionate thing to do. And then lastly, we tend to shame and blame for mistakes. Yep, again, not because we're bad people, because our brain's trying to get us safe by sorting out what the heck that is and getting somebody else to take accountability for it. So chances are you have one or more of these tendencies as your go-to soothing mechanisms for when your brain feels that sense of fear in relationships. Again, no judgment to that. These are very logical, neurological things to reach for. But what I want to do is plant the seed with you today that none of these behaviors are compassionate and they shoot psychological safety in the foot. If what you want is psychological safety and compassion with your team, every time you invest in one of these behaviors, even if it's a really small moment, you move away from the very team environment that you're trying to create with each other. And to Louise's point at the top and Jennifer's point, it helps you, it makes it harder for you to be compassionate for the patients and people that you're working with. So what's the alternative to these? Kindness. Again, think compassion is the Rolls Royce of kindness, right? And when we reach for kindness here, instead of leaping to conclusions, instead of mind reading, we're not sure about why did they say that? It looks like they're feeling something that I'm not entirely confident about. What the heck are they doing? We want to slow down and get curious. We want to ask, hey, what's going on there for you? Or, hey, I was a bit curious about what you meant by that. Or, hey, I wasn't sure how that landed with you. I just wanted to check in. Tell me what's happening for you. Take away from today, you are a very poor mind reader. No matter how good you think you are, no more chance, remember, than randomly flipping a coin in most situations. And so instead of judgment, we need to reach for curiosity. Yeah. Instead of getting stuck on the hump of politeness and biting our tongue or fixing it for them, see that this is somebody's moment of learning and growth, and respect that we all need those opportunities. The kind thing to do is say, hey, maybe that's not quite working the way you wanted it to, or hey, I can see maybe you're struggling a little with that. Do you want to talk about it? You could help them go through the learning loop. What's working well? Where are you struggling? What are we learning out of this? How would you like to adjust? Yeah, but don't rob people of learning opportunities because it's going to require you perhaps to get a little uncomfortable and vulnerable with each other in that moment. The kind thing to do is to get uncomfortable and clumsy if that's what it needs, rather than biting your tongue and fixing it for them. Instead of bitching and moaning out in the corridor, be kind enough to speak directly with them. I love the organisation Netflix has a cultural code, and one of their requirements is that if you're having a problem with somebody, you speak directly to that person. And if, as your colleagues, Jennifer came to me and said, oh my goodness, you're not going to believe what Louise did today, I would say, hey Jennifer, I really want to help on this. I just want to check, have you spoken to Louise about it first? And if not, the compassionate thing to do is maybe go talk to Louise about that. If you need me to jump in and help you guys figure it out, I'm happy to. But Louise's, you know, the compassionate thing to do is make sure Louise understands that's not quite working in your relationship, so you guys can figure it out directly. And then instead of shaming and blaming for mistakes, showing compassion for learning, right? We all bump up against our limitations, fall short, fail at times. It hurts, right? When we're in those moments quite often. And so how do we offer help? Hey, I can see perhaps that's not gone the way you want. Can I help? Yeah, even just be a sounding board, sit in that whole moment poop, as Louise was saying before. But how do we show compassion for learning? Cy Wakeman is a researcher that does a lot of looking in organisations around the amount of time we waste each day because we get stuck in this interpersonal mush with each other. And so just be aware, on average, most of us spend about 2 hours and 26 minutes a day leaking energy due to workplace relationship dramas. Now, where do those leaks come? Mostly down that judgment list. Yeah. So if you're thinking about, it's going to take time for me to sit down and have that conversation and do the learning loop with that person, or it's going to take me time to work up the courage to go and have that conversation, just know you could be saving about 2 hours and 26 minutes a day versus those judgment strategies. And so it's absolutely worth taking the time to maybe get in and explore. And at first it is hard, I'm not going to lie. Yep, at first, if these aren't things you already do, it's going to require kind of that deep breath, maybe some self-compassion as you go into it. For me, it's really helped to frame these behaviours as the kind thing to do and the judgment behaviours as the not kind thing to do. And that way, when I'm feeling a bit reluctant or awkward, like, oh, do I want to have that conversation with someone? It'd be so much easier to just go and bitch and moan about them. I think about that kind of like nudge in my shoulder that, come on, this is the kind thing to do. It's the compassionate thing to do. If this is how I want to show up in the world and make a difference, then this is where I want to step forward, okay? And so again, I'm going to leave you with a little piece from Cy's research to maybe think about who you've been struggling with at work recently. And if you try to look at what's unfolded through that lens of generosity, that this isn't someone trying to be difficult or disappointing or disruptive. This is someone who's doing the best they can with what they have in this moment. And yep, it might be falling short and it might not be where you need it yet. And it might be annoying you endlessly, or it might be creating risk for a patient. But right now, if we really saw that person as doing the best they could with what they had in this moment, how then might we be able to show up through a lens of generosity and curiosity rather than judgment? And if we think about perhaps how do we support them in that, well, what do we know for sure about what's happened rather than all the mind reading or the confabulation, the making up of the stories that our brain tends to do? What's our part in that? Because every relationship requires at least 2 people. So what's ours to own? One of the things that helps me to be compassionate in my relationships is remembering that every time I point the finger at somebody else, there are 3 fingers pointing back at me. So what's mine to own in this? What are your ideas for resolving the issue? And what can you do to help? Yeah, rather than stepping forth with blame, with judgment, with, oh my God, you won't believe what Jennifer did. Go and ask, hey, I can see perhaps this isn't quite working the way we want. How can I help? Yeah. And so again, these questions are in your playbook for you to think about. I know it can be awkward. I know it can take courage. I know it can push us out of our comfort zone. But the good news is you've got self-compassion as you do it. And the even better news is that the more you practice it, the easier it does absolutely get over time. So I like this last quote from Brené. Rather than stewing or seething with resentment, choose courage over comfort and get curious about what's happening in your relationships. So Louise is saying she's going to send along the playbook for you this afternoon. I know we're right on time to get you out to a break. And so Jennifer, I'll pass it back to you and Louise if there's anything else you need from me. Otherwise, I know people are welcome to keep asking questions in the chat, and I will absolutely circle back around with some written responses and extra resources and things like that for you.
Well, thank you, Michelle. That was absolutely wonderful. It's exactly what everybody needed to hear. It was just terrific to see people engaged in the chat with one another, with your material. Just really verbal applause for everything you presented. If everybody would like to unmute themselves and say thank you or clap your hands, it's really nice for a speaker to have that sort of auditory feedback. You can just go to your microphone and unmute, actually to the little 3 dots. So, and you can also use your reaction.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very thorough and very engaging. Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Just
you're so
wonderful.
welcome.
Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome. Thanks, guys. And again, feel free to send the questions through, Jennifer and Louise, and I'll help pull those extra resources together for you.
Terrific. Thank you so
Great.
much.
Thanks.
Everybody, we're going to have a break till 11 o'clock. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed Michelle's presentation as much as I did. We're back from our break, and I'm really pleased to introduce Diane Drago from our MOQC Patient and Caregiver Oncology Quality Council. So if Diane would like to unmute herself, she's going to give our MOQC update. And I will advance the slide and mute myself. Diane, if you're there, you're still muted.
Can you hear now?
Yes, thank you. Perfect.
I continued to get a message that said I was still muted, so sorry about that. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you briefly today on behalf of the Patient and Caregiver Oncology Quality Council to share some background on who we are and what we do. Most of you are generally aware of MOQC, of course, and see us and talk with us at meetings, but we thought today was a good opportunity to share a bit more about the council. MOQC, of course, was created as, I can share my screen. MOQC was created as a patient and caregiver advisory group, of course, to help increase the role of patients and their families or caregivers in the work that MOQC does. Many organizations have patient advisory groups, of course, but we as MOQC members have really found that our work with you is especially valued, and we appreciate that. MOQC represents our collective experiences as patients and caregivers with a variety of cancers. We come from across the state. We have a member from the UP, from Mid-Michigan, West Michigan, and down to Southeast Michigan. We presently have 14 members, with our 2 newest ones having joined us in April and March of this year. Recruitment to MOQC has always sought diverse representation, but since our retreat just prior to January's biannual meeting and throughout this year now, we've been working with MOQC leadership to actively increase MOQC membership, and especially to seek diversity in terms of gender, race, ethnicity, and as well as healthcare experiences themselves. We want to continue to support MOQC's efforts to ensure that minority groups, medically underserved, and those who have challenges with access to care continue to be represented on MOQC. So we wanted to take this opportunity today to again encourage the MOQC practices to consider nominating patients and caregivers for MOQC that represent the communities that you serve. Nominations and recommendations by practices are the path that most of us, if not all of us on MOQC, travel to become members, and we're grateful for that opportunity. So we hope that the practices will continue to be active participants in our recruitment efforts. The primary responsibility of MOQC members is to support MOQC's steering committee and the practices with input on development of new projects, and to provide critical feedback about patient care and caregiver experiences. In our formal role, MOQC members participate in bi-monthly teleconference meetings. 1 or more of us are always at regional and bi-monthly meetings, regional and biannual meetings. We provide feedback on documents and educational materials developed by MOQC. We serve on MOQC committees, including the Steering and Measures Committee. And as occasions arise, some of us also participate in special projects. For instance, 2 of us serve as MOQC's patient and caregiver representatives on the collaboration you have with the Pacific Business Group on Health to develop and test patient-related outcome performance measures for oncology. We've provided feedback to the state of Michigan on their project on clinical trials. We've provided feedback on hospice educational materials that is being developed by MOQC, and we participated in the end-of-life project discussions. We also have members who work with MOQC staff on website maintenance. MOQC members have also begun to identify other issues, efforts, projects that are of particular interest to us. For instance, at the January biannual meeting, one of our members spoke quite passionately about the importance of and how we as patients and patient caregivers can continue to help and encourage providers to treat the whole patient. Others have a particular interest in developing more resources for families and caregivers of patients. In the months ahead, we hope to be able to expand those efforts and help identify and work on those and other initiatives. So I hope this overview provided a little more insight into what we're doing and perhaps even inspired some of you to think about how we can better serve MOQC overall and even individual practices that might be seeking input from patients and patient caregivers. We're honored to work with you and want to continue to effectively give back and help improve the quality of cancer care in Michigan. So if you have questions, MOQC membership nominations, or ideas on how we might be able to provide other assistance to you, we'd be happy to hear from you. Thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you so much, Diane. I hope everybody realizes what a real asset it is to MOQC to have POXI working with us. And we've already heard from Amanda today. I'm sure everybody remembers Llewellyn's talk. And we really can't thank you enough for all the work that you do, your presence at our meetings. Mike Harrison travels with us to the Upper Peninsula for our regional meetings. Really, all of you are a tremendous boon to MOQC. And like Diane said, we are always looking for more members, especially members of people who struggle to access care, and not just token members. We're really talking about real investment in increasing diversity. I'm going to turn the hosting over now to Dr. Dawn Severson, who's the chair of our steering committee. For those of you on the steering committee, we haven't had a meeting. We didn't meet this morning like we usually do, so you didn't miss anything. Our meeting will be very soon, but Dawn is going to update you on what's been going on at the leadership level for MOQC governance. So I'm going to mute myself and let Dr. Severson unmute herself.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and it's been a beautiful morning. That was such a great presentation earlier. So glad to be able to participate and listen. And thank you, Jennifer, and to MOQC for making it available to us. Just some quick updates from the steering committee. Again, as Jennifer mentioned, we're going to be meeting soon. Typically, we would meet the morning of our biannual meeting, but given our current restraints, it's been delayed just a little bit. Just a quick note about the Measures Committee. That Measures Committee will also be meeting in July, on Wednesday, July 15th at 6 p.m., as you can see on the slide there. All are welcome to participate in it. And if you're interested in participating, we welcome your participation. Just let Dave, Bolin, Louise, or Jennifer know that you want to participate so they can provide you with a brief orientation on what the Measures Committee is about and what we'll be looking at specifically. One more note about the Measures Committee and measures in general, we will be retiring some of the disease-specific measures and selecting new measures across that are cross-cutting measures from COPE data. Additionally, MOQC and all of the other Blue Cross Blue Shield collaborative quality initiatives have been asked to present a strategic planning. And so we will be having a strategic planning meeting going forward, and a true goal and outline vision that will represent what our goals are for the next 5 years or 5 years from now. There will be multiple stakeholders, and there have been multiple stakeholders involved with the planning process, and MOQC's strategic plan will be completed by the fall of 2020 and will be shared with everybody, all the MOQC membership, very soon after it's completed in fall of 2020. One more note regarding our keynote speaker for our biannual meeting in January of 2021. It will be Jennifer Tamel. Dr. Tamel is the co-director of the Cancer Outcomes Research and Education Program and a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. Her research focuses specifically on optimizing palliative and supportive care for patients with cancer and for their families. We're so excited that she has agreed to come to Michigan to be with us, and we certainly hope that our next meeting in January 2021 will be an in-person meeting, although this has been really great to see things facilitated through Zoom. We miss seeing everybody's faces, and certainly being a part of a community together really it helps bolster all of us. Finally, MOQC is committed to anti-racism. The steering committee will be working through the coordinating center to identify and share resources that help all of us move toward that goal. Thank you very much for your attention this morning.
Thank you, Dawn, and thanks to the members of the steering committee. We will be in touch very soon to set up a meeting and continue our work forward. We really appreciate everybody who serves on the committee. All right, we are mindful of the time, and I'm going to move now into our data. We're doing something a little bit different, and we would like feedback in the chat, which I will not be watching while I'm presenting, or I'll get quite distracted, but Louise will be monitoring the chat. So we're going to show our data. Hang on, the slides are a little different when you're advancing, so are we improving? You'll get to see that today. I'd like to bring up the learning loop that Michelle shared. And one of the things that MOQC is striving for is to be a compassionate organization, compassionate towards each other and our coordinating center, and a compassionate organization towards you, our member practices, and to facilitate compassion towards our patients. As you know, I always say, we serve you, you serve the patients, and in that way, the coordinating center serves the patients of Michigan and their families and other loved ones. So I snagged this slide from Michelle where we act. This is where we practice in a certain way, and then we assess, and then we adjust. And this reminded me as she was talking about our plan, do, study, act cycle of quality improvement. So I thought it would be a great way to bring the morning talk together towards how we look at our data. So we often present our data and people look at where they stand and they compare it to other practices, and they, everybody wants to be the best, which is terrific. And then they wonder how they can improve their practices. And we don't want this to be judgmental. This is, how can we continue to do what we're doing well? So the way she said it is what went well, and where did we struggle? And to do this in a compassionate way, both towards ourselves and then towards others, both other practices and towards other members of our team. So we hope that when we present our data, that it comes across that way. And that's actually why we wanted to have the theme, Be Compassion today. And I thought it worked really well. So this is the same thing in our plan to study act cycle, but I loved the way it looped in this morning. So we're gonna, as I said, display things a little differently. We're gonna show two periods of data to compare. The first is the most recent data. So that's round 2 of 2019. And everybody's seen this at the regional meetings, but we're gonna show it not just for the region, but for the entire state. And this is, again, the most recent data. The round that just closed, we'll have that data available in August, so a couple months from now. And then you're going to see an animated slide where after 10 seconds of seeing this data with the practices at the bottom, the practice numbers at the bottom, the next thing we'll animate is the whole last year. So 2 rounds of data. So that performance you've not seen before because it's aggregated over the course of a year. So it's not a proportion you've seen, but again, it's aggregated over a whole year for comparison. And then you'll see in a legend, in the first histogram, the performance by practice and order of performance, the way we've been showing it the last couple meetings. And the second histogram will be the previous year of data, and the practice will stay fixed. So what I mean by that, if you can see me moving my hands, is you'll see the usual histogram, And then the same practice will be in the same place and it'll bounce around a lot more. And then if there's statistically significant differences, you'll see a little caret at the bottom by the practice, either up or down, depending on the direction. And it could be favorable or not, depending on whether lower is better or not. It'll make sense in just a minute. And then we have our color coding right here, where MOQC is in the deep purple. COPE is the national performance for practices participating in COPE, and that's green. And then all the practices are in the pale blue. And then we have the quartiles, which are just for round 2. So I'm going to show you an example. This is tobacco cessation, and the N is for the most recent round. So across MOQC, what you can see here is 456 patients were smokers across the practices. And this is a VBR measure, so the VBR target is shown. And you can see the practices along the bottom, and to get this to fit with the little carets for statistical significance, it had to be staggered. So some are in the top row and some are in the bottom. There's no meaning to that. It was just to allow them to fit. And then you can see the little carets pointing down or up. And those are going to be showing up with the previous round of data. Does that make sense to everybody? If it doesn't, put it in the chat, and then Louise will let Vanessa know that I need to explain it again. So this is a static one. It's not an animated one. And they'll go back and forth a couple times. And I'll speed up, don't worry. I just wanted to show you what this will look like. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next slide. And the first one is tobacco cessation. Hang on, it's not moving. Okay. So here's the last round, 456 people, and that's what the last round was by practice. And you can see that the statistically significant differences are marked with carets. Some have improved statistically, and some have improved, or some have decreased statistical decrease compared to the last time. And some of this is regression to the mean. You just see, over time, practices are going to change. And with the overall number being 456, it's a small number of people in our practices who are eligible for this measure. So it's going back and forth until I change it. And I'm hoping this makes sense to people. So this is fall, last round, and then you're seeing now the previous 12 months. So last round, we have quite a few practices at 100%, and then COPE across the nation is 43, and it got worse in this last round in COPE. So again, let's be compassionate. What's going right, and what can we work on? Where did we struggle? So if you don't understand the way this is being presented, please let Louise know, or just put it in the chat and I can explain it again. And I'm going to go to the next measure. All right, this is giving, for people getting high antiemetic risk chemotherapy, giving both an NK1 receptor antagonist and olanzapine. And higher is better. And you can see that there's a lot of room for improvement. This is not GYN oncology practices where the performance is very good. Our suspicion is this is reluctance to use olanzapine. The guidelines say 10 milligrams. You can actually see benefit with 5 milligrams or even 2.5 milligrams, which is what they use in older patients in GYN oncology practices. We have resources available on the website with evidence supporting the use of olanzapine in people getting high emetic risk chemotherapy. So we have a lot of room to improve. And this is a big number. The previous year, because it's 2 rounds of data, is actually twice the number. MOQC as a whole has improved statistically significantly with the most recent round. All right, this is one in which we want to see lower is better. So this is giving NK1 receptor antagonist or olanzapine for patients getting low or moderate risk chemotherapy with cycle 1, where lower is better. So what we'd like to do is not be giving, primarily it's the NK1 RAs that we're giving in people getting low or moderate risk chemotherapy. And for those of you worried about carboplatin, the measure now includes a cutoff for the AUC for carboplatin. And you can see we have a lot of patients. So we have 1,000 patients. And for the previous year, it's twice as many. And we are actually doing quite a bit better on this. So that the downward arrows show that there's been a statistically significant improvement. I'll let it go one more time to the last round. Or maybe it stopped. Okay, I'll keep moving. Okay, there we go. All right, this is pain. Pain addressed appropriately, which means assessed, quantified, and a plan of care documented. We have 1,000 patients every round, so 2,000 in a year. You can see that most practices are well above 95%. COPI as a whole is at 90, MOQC as a whole is at 93. Not a statistical improvement from last time for either COPI or MOQC. Some practices are doing much better. A couple practices went down over time statistically. This may be, regression to the mean, meaning just an example is if somebody's born with a very, very high IQ, their offspring are more likely to have a more IQ that's closer to the mean the next time. Doesn't seem fair, but that's what that means. So this is a measure where we are moving to patient-reported outcomes because, again, this is a documentation measure, but we've done very well in improving at least documentation of pain and documentation of a plan of care. So kudos to our MOQC practices. All right, hospice enrollment. As you know, this is a major focus, and I'd like to welcome all of our hospice colleagues to our call today. We really appreciated your work. We are doing very well on this measure. We always can do better, but we have about 1,000 patients every 6 months who die of cancer. So 2,000 patients a year. You can see that MOQC has improved statistically from 47% up to 53%. COPI has not moved. Now, we've always fallen behind COPI, and it looks like we're catching up. And some of the practices have improved statistically, and some have decreased. So we're continuing to work on this measure. And we really appreciate the input from our POXI members. We have resources available on the website that I'll show you at the end. And we do have a group of experts, and we also have a pathway for radiation for patients on hospice so that they can get a short course of therapy that I'll also give you a brief update on at the end. And thank you to Tom Boinke for being on the call. Hospice enrollment and enrollment within 7 days of death, lower is better. So conditional upon being on hospice. So 533 patients are eligible for this measure because these are those people on hospice. We want to see lower is better. So you want to be on for more than 7 days and lower. So MOQC has improved significantly from 40% down to 30%. So we're definitely, or 32%, we're definitely doing better. At the overall individual practice level, we don't see a lot of improvement, but at least as a state, we're doing better. So improving our comfort with conversations about end-of-life care is getting there. And these are, a lot of it is small numbers in a given practice, but I'm really encouraged about this. This measures hospice enrollment or documented discussion. So what this means is it's you either enrolled the patient or you documented that you had a discussion, and it allows for the fact that the patient didn't enroll, whether it was preference or they died before they could enroll, or any other of the barriers that we've seen. So we're definitely doing better on this as a collaborative. And I think this speaks to your commitment to improving care. You can see that we have improvements. A couple of the practices that are at 100%. The practice that it's 100% but not statistically improved is just small numbers. And that is one of the things that we see in some of our practices. You know, if you think about how many people, if you're in a small practice that actually die in a 6-month period, it can be quite low. All right, this is chemotherapy administered within the last 2 weeks of life. This is a project that Dr. Paramuswamy is working on, and she sent out surveys. If you haven't returned your survey, if you're a medical oncologist and you haven't returned your survey, we're waiting on a few more. Yours is the most important survey. So please return your survey. We're still collecting those, and this is really our last push. You can really push this over the line. So please do return your survey. Chitra's on the call today, and I know she would be giving a thumbs up if she knows where her reaction button is. So please do help her out. This is a funded study for a really top-notch researcher, and we appreciate everybody who's returned their survey. You can see we're doing actually quite well in this measure, even though we were only at 12% before, going down to 9% as a statistical improvement because the number's so high. So this is really good. Now, I do need to say that a lot of agents we give that are very expensive to patients are not included as, quote, chemotherapy. So this measure may be changing, and we may see our numbers go up as a result of that. But it'll be different. Okay, now I'm going to show you measures that only have round 2 data. So they won't have the animation. So these measures were new for the last round, including bone mineral density testing within the first year of starting androgen deprivation therapy for prostate cancer, 2 breast measures that were new because they were recalculated from COPI and the previous data weren't valid. So they're sort of new. Bone modifying agent given for breast cancer, multiple myeloma, GCSF given for non-curative chemotherapy for the first cycle, and a complete family history defined as first and second generation family members and the age at diagnosis. That's what a complete family history is. So the animation won't be here. And like I said, if you want to enter in the chat what you thought about the animation, was it interesting, too distracting, you would have preferred separate slides? Just, I do want to know because we can go back to the way we've done it before. Okay, oops, let's see. All right, we jumped into CME, so I'm hoping I have my slides. All right, hang on, I'm just cruising through this here. Something jumped. Okay, I don't know how that happened, but okay, so here's the bone modifying agent administered for breast cancer, bone mets, or multiple myeloma. Please take a note of the N. 54 patients, guys, across the entire state. Now, you'll notice not all of our practices are represented on the x-axis. That's because not every practice submitted data. And so that means that we don't always have data. All the COPI certified practices can skip around once a year. But this is a problem, right? If we only have 54 patients in the state, this isn't useful. And the confidence intervals are very wide on this. So you got your data at the regional meetings and you know that the number of patients you have eligible for this measure are very small. And as Dawn mentioned in the steering committee update, we're going to be retiring disease-specific measures. And this slide is here to show you why. When we have such small numbers, we really, first of all, can't do quality improvement projects. On the other hand, if you see small numbers like this and your performance is low, this might be something to look at in your own practice, but we're not going to make this a major QI project. All right, my next slide, sorry for the bouncing around. This measure, on the other hand, a complete family history documented in patients with invasive cancer. We had 3,000 patients across the state. Complete family history being first and second generation family members, all cancers, and what age they were diagnosed. The reason it's all cancers, even tobacco-related cancers, is because there are gene-environment interactions that we're going to be finding out about. And because the field is changing so rapidly, we want to make sure we're collecting all cancers. And surprisingly, a lot of us don't know about syndromes like lobular breast cancer and gastric cancer. That's a genetic syndrome. So it's very helpful to be collecting this, and we'll be providing information support about syndromes that people don't always know about. Now you can see we're on par with the national average. You can see that we do have an excellent a practice that's really much higher than others. And I'll be talking about our newly awarded grant that Elena Stoffel-Ken-Reznikow, I and several other people were just notified of yesterday. A really exciting project that will be rolling out across MOQC. It's going right now through the Research and Publications Committee. For those of you on the committee, expect to see that in your inbox soon. That's Shannon Wills, Sherry Lewandowski, and Ernie Balcueva. So we'll be working on this very soon. Here's growth factor administered to patients who get chemotherapy with non-curative treatment. Right now, this is just the first cycle, and obviously lower is better. This is a choosing wisely measure. So there's 727 patients who are eligible for this measure. And I think the problem with this measure and why the level's so low is because it's cycle 1. And I think if we look across the entire course, we'll see higher performance. We have to think about this measure. So the measures committee will be tackling this one. If you're interested in working with us on these measures, if you don't like these measures, just like Michelle was saying, if you let's not do the bitch and moan, join and compassionately share your opinion. These measures are selected by patients, abstractors, nurses, pharmacists. I'm the only person from U of M on this. Everybody else is from the community. We have administrators, nurses, etc. So join the committee, weigh in. If you don't like them, I want to hear about it, and the committee wants to hear about it. All right, the next one, these are the next two are the breast cancer specific measures. So these are basically advanced imaging. The way I describe it to patients is anything that needs an IV ordered as within 60 days after diagnosis for stages 1 and 2 breast cancer. These are what we call staging scans, and we actually know from the records whether it's done in the setting of symptoms. Lower is better. This is a choosing wisely measure, close to 1,000 patients every 6 months. And performance is quite good on this. But there are some practices that stand out as having higher than the national average in terms of ordering scans that are low value. And again, these are not in people with symptoms. These are asymptomatic patients. So this is a value measure, actually prolonged start to chemotherapy and independent and multivariate analysis, increases costs. The first scan you do requires follow-up scans, and it increases anxiety and out-of-pocket costs for patients. So we are probably going to retire our disease-specific measures, even though we have a high number, just because performance is quite good. But if your practice is an outlier, you might want to focus on this measure. The next one, these are serum tumor markers ordered in patients after 30 days to 365 days after the diagnosis of breast cancer receive treatment with curative intent. So these are sort of surveillance markers, if you will, but only 73 patients were included in this measure across the entire state. And if you remember your table from the regional meeting, very small number of patients, so very big confidence intervals. And this is another measure that we are going to discuss retiring. This is a measure that's actually being retired from COPE as a whole, so we won't have national comparison. Megan Karam, who's at the University of Michigan, heads up the GU measures group for ASCO, and has challenged, along with David Smith, I'm sure, who's on the call, whether there's any evidence supporting this measure that in all patients getting androgen deprivation therapy actually need a bone mineral test within the first year. And most patients are cared for by urologists in this setting. So across the entire state in 6 months, only 110 patients qualified for the measure. So, and you can see our performance is actually quite good on this. If you're an outlier, your confidence intervals were actually pretty high. So another measure that we wanted to include, we've done it, and we'll probably retire. All right, so our summary is we have excellent progress on a number of measures. The data will inform decisions that we make in the measures committee, to which everyone is welcome. Usually I know you've heard this before, but we usually have a 4-hour meeting with wine and steak, and it's in Lansing, but it's going to be probably closer to 2 hours with a break in the middle, done virtually. Please let me know in the chat what you think about the animated slides. And if you are an outlier, either doing extremely well, or if you need some support, Blue Cross Blue Shield actually has services to help you improve quality for free, and so do we. And we're going to do that act, assess, adjust approach using a compassionate framework. And we hope that we always have, but we're going to do this purposefully. And we hope that you can also practice self-compassion and compassion towards yourself and towards your team members. This isn't a, why are we not doing well? It's what's going right. Where do we struggle? What do we need? What do we need from the coordinating center to help us do better? We can't give you all back your paper charts. I don't know that you would want us to, but what can we do to help your team provide the best care without taxing yourselves? And what can we do to make sure these measures are meaningful and we're not just measuring for measurement's sake? Does that all make sense to everybody? You can give me a thumbs up if you know how to use the reactions, or a clap. We don't have a thumbs down, thankfully, or a frowny face. All right, you can spend a minute putting things in the chat if you want to. And then I'm going to go to our quality projects. All right, so questions and comments, if there are any, I don't know. All positive, says Vanessa. You're awfully generous, thank you. All right, so I'm going to breeze through this so that we can try to end close to on time. These are all of our projects, and yes, this is all coming out to you in email. So we have a lot going on. I'm not going to go through all of these. Everything's moving along beautifully. I did want to make a couple points about hospice enrollment in particular. I've already mentioned Dr. Paramaswamy's survey, and like I said, your survey is the last one we need. Yes, I am talking to you. So if you don't have it, if you've misplaced it, just email me or Louise or Dave or any of us to say, please send me another one, or put it in the chat and we'll send you another one. Because to get published and to do something with this, Chithra needs a certain proportion, and we are almost there. So you're the one to make a difference. Pick up the phone, just $5 a month. I'm kidding, sorry. It's a joke. All right, so this is work that Tom Boyke and Kieran Devasetti and our radiation oncology partners have done all over the state. We have come up with, if you've been at our regional meetings, you may remember that we've done work with our hospice partners, and a shout out to everybody who's been involved in on our committee doing this. We are trying to come up with a way to allow patients on hospice, as they head off to hospice, to know that should they develop an indication for short course, we're talking 1 day of palliative radiation therapy to palliate a symptom that responds to radiation therapy, to be seen, evaluated, have a scan that's used both for planning and simulation all in one, so that it doesn't break the hospice bank, and so that the radiation oncologist can give the best care all in one. That we now have a commitment from all of these different radiation oncology practices to go along with this pathway. If you haven't seen it, if you want to see it, we're piloting this now. We haven't reached out to all the hospices yet, but many have agreed to do this. We didn't put the hospices on because We didn't want those who haven't yet had a chance to connect with us to feel excluded. But here by region, we have all the radiation oncology practices who thus far have agreed to a one-day level 3 visit, which does mean they are willing to operate at a loss, but to serve our patients in Michigan. I hope everybody understands what a great service this is to our patients. Now, the number of patients actually who are going to have radiation is actually quite small, but what this does is it helps that conversation when we have somebody go to hospice, not to say you can't get radiation. So if patients meet certain criteria, if the hospice physician is willing to write pre-meds as they head over to radiation for, let's say, an NK1RA to help with nausea, if the radiation field is likely to cause nausea, this can be done in a very streamlined way. Again, we don't expect this to be a lot of patients, but it's so nice to have this option for patients. So Sam Bussarian put this slide together. Thanks, Sam, for that. This will be in your slides that you get later. And then I did want to mention our Moonshot grant that was just awarded. Our co-director in MOQC, Shatanju Upal, is also on this grant, and the GYN oncologists at their biannual meeting, very excited about this grant. I just have a couple slides. I know I'm a little over time. So the gaps and the barriers to genetic counseling and testing are, hang on, I've got one more build slide, maybe not. Oh, this is so much fun. I love these bounces. Okay, so we know that only a fraction of people are getting tested. It's about 10% of people who are eligible for counseling and testing are getting it. And that's in part due to the fact that medical oncologists just don't have the bandwidth to keep up with all the cancers. You know that now people with pancreas cancer should all be tested regardless of their family history, even if they are not going to benefit from treatment. PARP inhibitors are going to be available, and their family members can cascade testing. Cost is a barrier. Information support for patients and their families. Genetic counselors are all barriers. I have Dr. Elena Stoffel on the call who can answer any questions. So, yeah. Okay, we're gonna. I hear there's some sound barriers. So, can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Maybe I was talking too fast. So these are all the barriers we acknowledge in the project. We have 3 aims, and we're focusing on 5 cancers: breast, endometrial, ovarian cancer, pancreas cancer, and advanced prostate cancer, not early stage. The first goal is to improve the quality of the family history. You saw from our performance that we struggle with this. And a lot of it is patients don't know the age at which their family member was diagnosed. All you have to do is say unknown. The other thing I find helpful is to refresh that information at the second visit. And if you do that, that's in the record and our abstractors collect that. So don't worry if they don't know the family history the first time. So our question is, does a tablet-based family health history survey tool improve the completion of the family history? So if you already have a very effective, streamlined way of collecting a family history, you don't need to use this tool. But we're going to be providing an instrument that patients can complete that will provide you a 3-generation family health history. This has been validated, and this will be done in conjunction with genetics information support for oncology teams. We'll be providing this through regional meetings, through webinars. You get CME credit, maintenance of certification. We're going to make this just top notch, and we're hoping to partner with Ed Smith on this because he's passionate about this as well. Elena Stoffel, who's the contact PI for this grant's on the call. And we're also partnering with the state health department through a grant that they have, one of the few in the country, through the CDC to provide genetic counseling through the state. So even if your practice doesn't have access to a genetic counselor, we're providing that. So then our second aim is at the patient and family level, and we're going to increase the proportion of people who get genetic testing. Now, this isn't just, this doesn't just mean that we need to provide more counselors. We need to overcome barriers and questions patients have. We know in our Middle Eastern population that there may be concerns about marriageability. So we're doing deep cultural tailoring to address those concerns. People have concerns about genetic discrimination, about cost, about what they would do if they were found to be a carrier, about childbearing. So we're going to be providing tailored information support to patients. So we have a 3-arm study. This is not actually in your practice, but this is what's going to happen to patients after they are identified as having a high risk. Now, if you're already referring your patients, don't worry. These are people who aren't getting referred. We're going to have a 3-arm study of a tailored messaging via a mobile optimized web interface through an app versus genetic counseling with motivational interviewing versus usual care. And then our exploratory question is, can we improve the uptake of cascade testing? And our virtual genetic counselor app, the content is going to have things such as, why should I get tested? How and where do I get tested? Understanding results and communicating with family. And that's all through the app, tailored on the concerns that people have indicated are their concerns. This is really tremendous, and it's going to be built through the Center for Health Communication at the University of Michigan. And this is a lot like the Tips for Health app that the rural practices who participated in Dr. Hawley's project will know, but it's even more deeply tailored. So I'm really excited about this. If you want to put your thoughts about this in the chat, and we'll be working with you to make sure this is acceptable to you. But the first aim is the one you're going to be most involved, which is the family health history tool. I wish I could see you all. I'm used to nodding, smiling, hand raising, people going to the mic. This is hard for me. I don't know what it's like for you. So Elena, you're not a co-host, but she can be your co-host now. If you want to unmute yourself and add anything.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for introducing our study. I think that what we know is that about 1 in 10 patients with advanced cancers have germline pathogenic variants that have implications for not only their own cancer management, but also risk reduction and screening for their family members. So our hope is to be able to make it easier for patients who meet criteria for genetic testing to actually get that testing and accomplish that testing. And there are barriers on so many levels that I think that with information we can overcome. So we're really excited about working with MOQC on this and for taking care of the patients throughout the state of Michigan. This is a collaborative approach with MOQC and with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. So we're really excited. So thanks so much for the time.
Thank you, Elena. This is an opportunity to save lives. A lot of what we do, we prolong life, we give people chemotherapy when we're not even sure if they need it or if it's going to benefit them. This is a real opportunity to save lives. Shay Howe is our summer student, and she'll be working on translating the family health history tool and doing cultural testing, focus groups, and at least starting the protocol for that. We're really delighted to have her. She's from GW. So Amanda, you've got a historical kindred spirit, and so stay tuned for this, the regional meetings, and we'll make sure that this is worth your time by deepening your knowledge and expertise in this area. All right, moving on. So comments or questions can go in the chat, and Louise and Vanessa will read those out to me, or Sam will let me know of those. Oh, the access to the app will be rolled out for patients. Physicians will, of course, be able to see what this looks like. We're right now developing it. The Family Health History tool, which will be available to your practices beginning in early January, if we just got IRB approval, or we're just about to get IRB approval here at U of M, we know we need to go through your own IRB. If you can use U of M's IRB, would you please put that in the chat? If your practice will allow that, would you let us know? Shayna, our research coordinator, will be working with you if we need to go through your own IRB. So Wayne State has its own, the McLaren system has its own. If you know we need to go through yours, Shayna probably knows that already, but I wouldn't mind if you put in your thoughts about IRB approval. Because this is NIH funded, we can use our central IRB, but we also recognize that your own health system has its own rules. And the reason we're planning on starting in January is because it takes it that long to get through all the IRBs. So let me know what Ascension requires. Let me know what IHA requires. But if you can use ours, let us know that, because then we can get started. The doctor education is going to start, doctor, NP, APP, office manager, all that education is going to start sooner than that, because we want to help you, get smarter than you already are. And this is really hard to keep up with. We know a lot about breast and ovarian. GYN oncologists know a lot about ovarian and endometrial, but who knows about, some of these newer syndromes that we're learning, and they keep changing. There's not a real engine for us to learn about this unless you happen to have a special interest in genetics, like Shannon Wills, who's a PhD in genetics. So this is an area where I think a lot of us feel overwhelmed. If you have to recertify for the boards, this is going to really help you, because a lot of this is on the boards. So I'm speaking to those of us who have to keep taking our boards. So any other questions? Okay. All right, I'm going to keep moving then. All right, so please do complete your meeting evaluation, especially about the format for the animated data. What you thought about, Michelle, is, last time we did Faith and Culture, we've never received such good evaluations. Dr. Temmel will be talking about palliative care, hospice care. We're planning on having more symptom management presentations coming up. Let us know what you'd like to cover in the regional meetings. The sky is the limit in terms of what we can cover. We do want to be a compassionate organization. As Dawn mentioned, we are going to be working on building racial equity. If you're interested in participating in that, if you'd like to have a role in selecting resources, we could use all the help. We want representation. We want different input. If you're interested in a book group, let us know. This is not, MOQC doesn't have a top-down coordinating center tells you what to do. We work for you. You are MOQC. We aren't MOQC. You are MOQC. And this is really part of our heartbeat is anti-racism. And we serve a diverse state, and our practices are diverse. So we want to make sure that we practice anti-racism. And I know it was just a bullet point on our steering committee update, but please, text me, chat me privately, email me, or any of us, and let us know, what you want your role to be, or what ideas, resources, books you've read, etc. Pain points, please let us know. Regional meetings are here. We are hoping they're in person. We really love seeing everybody. The locations and dates are subject to change because of COVID. I hope the dates stay the same. The locations, we're going to keep everybody safe. Our next biannual meetings are here. Again, we're hoping they're in person. We'll be back at the Inn at St. John's. That's where Dr. Temmel will be. That's a shout out to Dr. Side, who's wanted to have Dr. Temmel for a while. Our GYN oncology practices, please, you're all welcome to attend. These are fabulous meetings. It's a small group and a lot of work gets done. Really terrific group, November 14th. Because of the MSU and U of M games, sometimes the meetings get changed because we don't always know where those games will be. And you let us know if you want any of our resources mailed to you. quitline resources, herbal supplements, cancer treatments, and the CME instructions will be sent out to everybody who registered us. You can always get in touch with us. We have a joke in here. You don't need to leave your name tags on the table. We'll see you at the fall regional meetings. Please travel safely. That's another joke, but with compassion for yourselves and for others, for your patients, which I know you always have. And know that we have compassion for you in these really difficult times. There's always pain in the room. We see you. We love you. And thank you for being here today.